In our last episode, we turned an app with a really big, ugly, monolithic router into something a little bit more manageable using Express, but we didn't have time to dive too deep into it. So this time, we're going to start looking more deeply into Express. What exactly is Express? Well, if you go to its website at expressjs.com, you can read the little text blurbs, and there's this one in particular saying how Express is a minimal and flexible Node.js web application framework. Basically, what Express does is it provides some really nice abstractions on top of what Node does natively. The thing we saw last time was how it makes routing a whole lot easier to work with than manually parsing URL strings. Now, Express in its turn is built on top of a project called Connect, and if you go to Connect's website, you can read that Connect is a middleware framework for Node. So continuing down our depth-first search tree of definitions here, what is middleware? Well, middleware can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. The definition that we're going to go with is code that does stuff before a request gets to your core application. Now, this can be a lot of different things. It can handle dealing with cookies, logging requests, or providing support for cross-site request forgery protection. Connect provides a nice utility toolbox of middleware, and Express is one framework that strings those tools together to make something a bit higher level. One thing to notice if you look at the list of middlewares here that Connect provides is that there isn't a router. That's just too high level of a concern for what Connect is. That's something better handled by frameworks like Express that build on top of Connect, and that's exactly what we're going to get into in this episode. In fact, let's do that right now. Here's a package file for our project that we're going to look at. It looks just like the last one. We declare Express as our dependency, and we go ahead and install all that. And then we're ready to start coding. The first thing that we need to do is go to our server file, and we're just going to paste some code in here that we have. Looks a lot like what we did last time. We just get Express, we create an app with it, and then one change that we're making here is we want to be able to supply a port number via an environment variable. So we do that by process.env, which we saw in a previous episode, tells us our environment. And then we get the port one. If we don't have it, just set it to 3000 by default. Start the app to listening, and then tell ourselves that it's running. Now, if we were to try to run this app right now, we wouldn't see much happen. If we tried actually hitting the server right now, we just get an error because we don't actually have any routes defined. So let's go ahead and define one. We want to put that in front of the call to app.listen. And what we're doing here is just at the root path, we're going to basically show a nice home page. Now, we do have to restart the server here because Node doesn't auto-load everything for us right now. And now when we hit the home page, we get this great thing telling us about Node Slash, which is the web's premier browser game, and we get a link to Adventures, which of course doesn't work, so let's go put a route in for that. Well, that's simple enough. We just come back to our server file here, pop in another route, and notice that this time all that we're doing is get on Adventures, and we render a form asking if the adventurer is feeling up to the task. So we go ahead and save that and just restart our server. And then having done that, we can reload this page, which asks if we're ready to go. So we click on it and, oh, we've got the same problem again. So let's go ahead and add that route in. Now this one, of course, is a little bit different because we're doing a form post here, and we're actually using the post method on that. So rather than call app.get, we're going to tell Express that we want to respond to this when it's a post. And this is what we saw last time with the file upload. So I'll just go ahead and put this shell in here, and then with a wave of the magic wand, boom, we have our handler in there. So let's go ahead and restart the server, and then just go see how this epic adventure plays out. So yes, I am brave as, and wow, that's just astounding right there. And if we want to have one of these exciting adventures again, we can. Great, now let's have a look at what we actually did. When you define a route using Express, you're just making a call on the app object and specifying the HTTP verb that you want to use for that route. So of course, with these first two, we just called get, gave it the path for both of them, and gave them a handler function. And it's the same thing for post. We said post this time, and notice even though these paths were the same, they were called in different circumstances. If there was a forum post, then we come back to here, and when we were just typing it into the address bar, we got this one. So, I mean, that's pretty straightforward, right? So while it is straightforward, we are kind of mixing up our routing with our request handlers. We don't have to do that. So we could just do something like this and get some functions separated out. So we just pull this, put it here, and then instead of doing an anonymous function right here, we could just put our call into home. And we'll go ahead and do that real fast for all the other functions as well. Well, this is all nice, but let's suppose that we want to reward our hero for this brave adventure, and we want to say something like, you have found some loot. Whoops, let's get those quotes right. And we're always going to give item number 1 for that. And then we'll close out the link and the paragraph. And let's have a look at what this would look like in the server. So when we run the adventure, oh, we see that we found some loot. And we click on that, and we can't get it because we don't have a route for it. All right, so how do we see what that looks like? Maybe we get it, and we can do this quite literally. We'll just do another magic wand wave here. Well, now we have a handler in place to show us the loot, and so we can go ahead and restart our server, head back over to our browser, and we can see that we get the information about our loot. So if we define it worked as we clicked the link and saw the result, then yes, this works. However, if part of our definition of it worked includes not going insane trying to add more, then it didn't really work. Because what do we do if we want to add another item of loot? Something like this. That gets quickly out of hand, right? I mean, these could be dynamic, coming from a database. We need some way to specify the route without having to manually increment these numbers. And in fact, Express has just a functionality for that. It supports named parameters and routes. So how would we actually get access to that? Well, we would come back up to our function here, and we can simply access that through the rec params object. And we just grab the ID member, because what Express is going to do is take our named parameter and then attach it as a property to the rec.params object. And then just to convince ourselves that this was actually working this way, we can put a little note in here that looks something like that. We go ahead and restart our server and then reload the page, and we can see that it was ID 1. We can do the same thing for ID 5, and voila. Well, let's raise one last question here. If you know the HTTP spec at all, you know that it has more than just get and post. And if you've ever done Rails and the way it handles REST, then if we wanted to edit an adventure, supposing that we were saving it, you would do something that looks a little bit like that. And that actually wouldn't be edit, that would be update adventure. And then we'd want to have a function that implements that route, of course. And so we would have our update, and then we'd put something in the response here. But the question is now, this is a put, so how would we actually access this one? The answer to that will have to remain a mystery for this week since we're out of time. But hopefully this episode has given you a good idea of how routing is declared in Express and shown how that can really save a lot of the pain and just better organize our code. Now, when we do get into the answer to this mystery next week, it's going to take us into the world of Express middleware. And this is a place where Express is really going to start shining for us. We're going to get to see all the great things that Express already ships with, as well as see how to write our own middlewares. And when we start being able to organize the code this way, what you're going to see is that we can just really separate the sort of nuts and bolts part of the application from our actual core business logic. This silly app we're doing here is doing adventures, like, some sweet hack and slash stuff. But a full app doing this would have things like user authentication and authorization. And really, we don't want to have that mixing in with our ogre slaying, for example. And Express, with its middleware we're going to start seeing next week, is really going to make it easy to maintain that clean separation. Hope you join us next week for that, and till then, happy coding. If you found this episode useful, or if it saved you some time, would you consider spreading the word by either sharing it on Facebook, tweeting it, or even just linking to it from elsewhere on the interwebs? Thanks a bunch.